I want to start by asking you something. When you were a child, when you were scared or sad, overwhelmed or angry, what happened? What happened in your house? Not what should have happened, but what actually happened. For some of you, someone came. Someone sat with you, they named what you were feeling, and they made it smaller by just being present. You were lucky. The research tells us that those early experiences, being emotionally held, are some of the most protective things that can happen in childhood. But for a lot of people, more than we talk about, nobody came. Or somebody came, but they fixed it, they redirected it, they told you to cheer up or calm down or stop being sensitive. Or the feeling was met with discomfort, with impatience or silence. And that's not because they didn't love you, but because the adults around you hadn't been given the words either. And so you grew up. You became a parent yourself, and you looked at this child in front of you, this child who was scared or sad or angry or overwhelmed, and you wanted more than anything to do it differently, to give them what you didn't have. And sometimes you didn't know how, because nobody shown you. Today's episode is for you. I'm Ash Costello from The Resilient Kid, and this is the story of the words we never had and how we learn them, even now. So, I want to tell you about a dad called David. No relation to mine. And also when I talk about his son Marcus, no relation to my brother-in-law. Just general names, common names, so that I can use some stuff which are a composite of clients. David was referred to us because his son Marcus, who was 12, football mad, usually the loudest person in a room, had gone quiet. Not quiet in a restful way, quiet in a way that makes us as parents, our stomach drop a little bit. That withdrawn, that flat, spending more and more time in his room, snapping when he did come out, saying when asked what was wrong, nothing, I'm fine, leave me alone. David, the dad, sat across from me in our first session, and I could see immediately that he was a man who deeply loved his son, had absolutely no idea what to do. He was uncomfortable in the room, shifting in his seat and looking at his hands. Clearly more at home on a football pitch with his son or at a work meeting than in a therapy office talking about his feelings. And he said to me, I'm not really good at this sort of thing, talking about feelings and that. And I said, that's okay. Tell me about Marcus. And he did. He talked about his son with such pride, such love and fear. Fear that there was something wrong, fear that he was missing something, and fear maybe he was the wrong kind of dad for a son that needed help of this kind. And then I asked him, when you were 12 and something was wrong, what did you do with it? And he thought about it long and hard. And he said, kicked a ball, went to my room. I just got on with it. And if you were upset, like really upset, could you have told someone? He shook his head immediately, no hesitation. No, that's not how it was in our house. You just got on with it. My dad was the same. His dad was probably the same. And he said this very matter of fact, no pity, just a statement of fact. And then he said something that I have never forgotten, stayed with me. I don't even know if I know what I'm feeling half of the time. How am I supposed to help him with what he's feeling? That question, that honest, vulnerable, quietly devastating question, that's the question in the heart of this episode. So welcome, let's get on with it. You know, I like to delve into the research around this kind of thing because the research tells why does it matter. So what David described, growing up in a home where emotions weren't managed by just getting on with it, where the language of feelings wasn't spoken, has a name in research. It is called low emotional expressivity in the family environment, and studies consistently show that children who grow up in this kind of environment with that not being able to express their emotions, where feelings are not named, not discussed, not validated, develop what we call Alexithymia. Now, this is from the Greek, no word for feelings. It's not a diagnosis, it's a spectrum. Many of us sit somewhere on that scale without knowing. It's an experience of knowing something feels bad, but not being able to identify what it is. Or having an emotion in the body. So the tension, the flatness, the restlessness, without being able to label it, locate it, or talk about it. In our sessions with kids, one of the biggest things that we do is get them to recognize it in their body. Where is it in our body? How does it feel in our body? Where does it show up? Is it in our hands? Is it in our chest? Is it in our stomach? Is it in our head? Really get them to identify where it shows up first, physically. Now, research by Professor Mark Taylor, he studies in the University of Toronto, found that people with higher levels of this, not being able to give a word for how they're feeling, show significantly greater difficulty regulating their emotions, maintaining close relationships, and accessing support, so asking for help when they need it, not because they don't feel things, but because they've never been given the tools to work with what they feel. And here's the intergenerational piece, the thing that connects David to Marcus. Research on emotional socialization, led by another researcher, Joseph Kuroki, and colleagues, shows that children learn how to relate to their emotions primarily from watching the adults in their life. When a parent dismisses their own emotions, pushing through, getting on with it, not naming it, not naming what's happening internally, whether they can or not, children learn that emotions are things to be managed and suppressed, not felt and expressed. Just hear that again. Children learn that emotions are things to be managed and suppressed, not felt and expressed. When a parent doesn't have the words, the child often doesn't get the words either. Not because of any failure of love, because the language is taught, it's not innate. And you cannot teach what you've never been given. But here's where it gets hopeful, because the research also tells us something remarkable about neuroplasticity, the brain's capacity to change and constantly rewire itself. Dr. Dan Siegel, again, old favourite of ours, works on mindsight. And that is the ability to observe and understand your own process, what's happening in the brain. We are the only species who can study the brain. So this shows the emotional literacy is a skill and can be learned at any age. I have a couple of clients in their 80s, and when I started to talk about this, they said to me, oh, but you know, that old adage, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. It's a lie. It's a myth. You absolutely can, irrespective of age. The brain does not stop being able to form new pathways. In fact, it's fantastic. It doesn't matter if a 40-year-old who spent a whole lifetime just getting on with it can learn with the right support to identify, to name and work with their emotions. It's harder than learning as a kid, of course. That's why we're here. That's what our majority of our work is around teaching kids emotional literacy, emotional intelligence, so that it gives them the skills, it gives them the future-proofing skills for later in life. But that does not mean that as parents of any age or grandparents, we can't do it. It's absolutely possible. And the research shows something even more powerful. When a parent learns emotional literacy alongside their child, when they're both at the same time developing new language for feelings, the relational impact is profound. The child sees their parent struggling with the same thing they're struggling with. They see it's possible. They see they can learn. They see that asking for help is what adults do when they don't know something and they feel less alone in it. Segal calls this earned security, the process by which adults who did not experience secure attachment in childhood can develop the internal resources of a securely attached people through reflection, through that reflective work. You don't have to have the words to give your child the words. You just have to be willing to find them. And together is better. We've mentioned before the work of John Gottman, whose emotional coaching research I've mentioned several times on this podcast, identified 5 types of parents in response to children's emotions. At one end, we have the emotion dismissing parent, not out of cruelty, but because that's all they've ever been shown. And then at the other end, the emotion coaching parent, the one who stops, names, validates, and helps the child problem solve from a place of feeling understood. The distance between those two is not talent, it's not personality, it's awareness and practice. This parenting journey is not an easy one. It's hardest job in the world. I've been doing my job for 30 years this year, and I would say to you, parenting is still the hardest job, even I've got all the tools in the toolkit, because it's effort. It takes effort. You have to put a shift in with these kids. But it does mean that it's available to anyone. David was an emotion dismissing parent because he had an emotion dismissing childhood. It was not his fault, but what happened next was a choice. So let's give you some top tips. You know, I always like to do this in this segment of the podcast. So learning the language you were never taught. Here are 5 places to start. For any parent who hears themselves in David's story, and if you're listening to this, it might not be you, it might be your partner, and you've not understood why they don't parent in the same way. They don't understand the emotional. Maybe they dismiss the kids and and they think you're soft and you think they're hard, and actually there is a middle ground. So let's start with yourself, not the child. Before you can help your child name their feelings, you need to begin to notice your own. At the end of each day, ask yourself 3 questions. What did I feel today? Where did I feel it in my body? What was happening when I felt it? This is not therapy. This is not that deep. It's practice. It builds the muscle. Do that every night. 2, use feelings vocabulary literally. There are feeling wheels, there are feeling charts designed for kids that are just as useful for us. You can get posters. In fact, I think we've got a poster. If you send me an email, I'll send it you for free. But it has emotions on there so that you can see what it is that you're trying to recognize in yourself. Put it on the fridge. I think I'm feeling frustrated today. That's a complete sentence. It doesn't have to be profound, just honest. But having a look at those emotions, sometimes we think I'm angry, and actually it might not be angry, it might simply be frustration. You'll know the difference, but have a look at something like that and have it around so you and the kids can see it. 3, name your own feelings out loud. Not to burden kids, not to overshare, but to model. I'm feeling a little bit anxious about my meeting today. I noticed I was irritable this morning. I think I was tired. Things like that. When a child hears a parent name their own feelings, calmly, simply, without the drama, they learn that feelings are normal, nameable things. And that is huge. 4, repair the dismissals. You will get it wrong. We all get it wrong. There is no such thing as a perfect parent. You will say calm down or you'll be fine when what was needed was something else. When you notice you've done it, even hours later, go back. It does not matter how long. I said calm down earlier. I don't think that helped. What were you actually feeling? That repair is worth more than getting it right the first time. 5, do it together. Be honest with your child, age appropriately, but that you're learning this too. I didn't really grow up talking about feelings, but I want us to get better at it together. That honesty changes the dynamic between you entirely, and you're no longer the expert dispensing wisdom from above. You are two people figuring something out side by side, and that's a really powerful position. Let's get back to the story. I hope those were helpful. David was not a man who found any of this easy. I want to be honest about that because I think that matters. He didn't walk out of our first session in a euphoria, as in it's all clicked, he's transformed. He walked out uncomfortable, a little embarrassed, and genuinely unsure if any of this was for him. But he came back. Week after week, he came back and he put the work in a particular way that things shift when someone is doing genuine work on themselves. Things began to change. He started to notice things, not in Marcus at first, but in himself. And he began to notice on the drive to work that he was tense. Instead of turning up the radio and getting on with it, he started to ask himself why. Sometimes he knew, sometimes he didn't. But the asking was new. The asking was everything. That was where the work was. He got a feelings wheel. He told me with a slightly sheepish grin, a big man with football stories and practical hands, and telling me he had downloaded a feelings wheel off the internet and put it on his phone. He said, I felt a little bit like an idiot, but I've been using it. And what did you feel this morning? Apprehensive, I think. Probably about this. And before, what would you have said? Nothing. Fine. I would have said I was fine. I probably wouldn't have come. Around 3 months in, something happened that I want to tell you about. Now, for me, 3 months is a little bit of a magic number. It's when we see a shift. And we often, when we're talking to parents, we ask them to sign up for 12 weeks, 3 months minimum. Now, they don't have to, and sometimes we get it sorted before then. But that is around our magic number. Marcus came home from school angry, slammed his bag down, went to his room, the usual. In the past, David would have either left him alone, his own strategy, or gone in and tried to fix it, what he thought a good dad should do. But both of which had made things worse. This time he knocked on the door and went in, sat on the end of the bed, and he didn't say anything for a moment, and then he said, I don't know what's going on for you, but I can see that something is. I'm here. Marcus didn't answer immediately, and then he said, after a little while, I got dropped from the football team. And David, who knew about being dropped, loved football, knew about a particular humiliation of that, the embarrassment, who had a whole landscape of feeling available to him that he'd never previously had words. And he went, you must be gutted. That's really gutting. I'm so sorry. Not to fix it, not it will be fine, not, oh, you've got other things, just recognising that feeling. Marcus looked at him like he wasn't quite sure this was his dad, and then shoulders dropped, particular physical release of somebody who's been holding on tightly to something and has been given permission to put it down. They sat together for 40 minutes, David said, just chatting, and David said this was the longest conversation him and Marcus has ever had that didn't involve football. And he said, I didn't even know I had that in me. And guess what? He did. He always had it in him. He just didn't have the words. So let's look at the bigger picture here. David and Marcus are not unusual. The pattern I described today, the parent who didn't get the language and therefore couldn't pass it on to their kids, is one of the most common things I see in this work, and it cuts across every background, every class, every culture. It's everywhere. And the good news, I genuinely mean this as good news, is that we're living in a moment of change. There is a generation of parents right now who are actively, deliberately choosing to do it differently, who are reading the books, listening to the podcast, and sitting in uncomfortable chairs of therapy offices, not because their childhoods were traumatic, but because they can see a gap between what they received and what they want to give to their own kids, and they're closing that gap, one named feeling at a time. This is not small. For me, it's huge. When you understand the intergenerational research, it's revolutionary. Because every parent who learns the language breaks a chain. Every parent who says, I'm feeling anxious today in front of their child, gives that child a word they will carry for the rest of their life. Every repair, every named feeling, every honest, I don't know how to do this, but I'm trying, travels it forward into the next generation and the one after that. I always say the work I do on myself is not for me, it's for my kids and their kids. You do not have to have the words to give your child the words. You have to be willing to start looking for them. I want to end today with something David said to me in our last session together. He'd been reflecting on the journey and where he had started and where he was now. And he said, I used to think that feelings was something you dealt with on your own, something private, something that if you showed it meant you couldn't cope. Now, he said, I think feelings are just information. They're telling you something, and if you can hear what they're saying, you can actually do something useful. Feelings are information, that's all. I've been saying that for years in therapy rooms, in classrooms, in training, in parent workshops for years. Hearing it back from a man who arrived in my office, unable to name a single emotion, and left slowly, imperfectly, humanly, able to sit with his son and say, that must be gutting, and mean it. That's the work. That's why we do this. So, if you grew up without the words, you are not broken. You are the person who was not given something you deserved. And it's absolutely, completely scientifically supported to say it's not too late. Start with the feelings, whether it's feelings wheel on your phone. Notice what you feel on the drive home from work. Start with one honest sentence in front of your child. That is enough. That is the beginning. And beginnings in this work are everything. Thank you for being here for this one. This episode and the one before about Claire and Ellie and the anxiety that travels through families without a word being spoken are two of the most important conversations I think we can have as parents and practitioners. If you missed the other episode, go back and listen. They sit beautifully together. Show notes, the feelings, vocabulary, resources and all research references are in the notes below. And if today's episode has stirred something in you for you or your child, please reach out. We're here and we will meet you exactly where you are. Until next time, keep finding the words. Know that they matter more than you realise.